I'm glad that you're here this morning, and we do have a number of visitors with us this morning, and we're certainly glad that you're here. I join in welcoming you and inviting you back to be with us at any opportunity that you have. We have one visitor with us who it's her very first time to be at church, and we're glad that she's here, and a special welcome. Several of you have gardens, and you can identify right now that the garden is a lot of work, and it takes a lot of your time and a lot of your energy, and it's hot out there, and you've got some rain finally on your garden, and now the grass is growing, and we think about gardens. And I want us to focus on some gardens this morning. We're going to look at some gardens that are identified in the Bible and the significance that's associated with those gardens, and learn a few lessons associated with that. One of the interesting things is the variety and types of gardens. Usually when we say garden, we think about a vegetable garden. And you think about planting that garden and taking care of it, tending it, and then reaping the benefits that come from it, the fresh vegetables that you get from the garden. We also know that there's flower gardens that some people cultivate and take great pride in, the beautiful flowers that they're able to grow and have in their gardens. So there's a variety of types of gardens. Some people have maybe even butterfly gardens, where various plants are that attract butterflies would be grown, so that it's beautiful in that aspect as well. I visited in the botanical garden recently in the Miami Beach area. And it was incredible to see the tropical type plants that are growing there, and how beautiful those plants are, and the various blooms that are associated with some of those plants. It's an incredible diversity, and plants that we do not find in this region. It's like a whole different, it is a whole different ecosystem to what you're able to see there, the beauties that are associated with it. But one of the interesting things, in that same block of property where that botanical garden is located, is a memorial. And it is a memorial to the victims of the Holocaust. And when you travel there and visit that area, it's very striking to see how, in this memorial, how humans can treat other humans, and it's very powerful, very moving to see the accounts of the people that suffered, and tribute to those who lost their lives during that time that actually is not so far ago in our past. But to have that beautiful garden they're coupled with an area that reminds us of such violence and such tragedy. It's amazing. But that is not altogether uncommon, because when we think about the gardens that we find in the Bible, we see something very similar. If we go back, James read a moment ago from the Genesis account, where we have the first mention of a garden. And we know it's the Garden of Eden. And in Genesis chapter 2, God has created man, and He's placed him in this garden. And the description here is an incredible paradise that God has created for man to inhabit. And we can try to visualize what a wonderful place that must have been, this garden that God has formed. This garden that God has made, where He walks in the cool of the day with His creation and with man in complete harmony with Him. So what an incredible place this is, this Garden of Eden. And then we realize the tragedy that is associated in this garden when we read in chapter 3 about temptation entering into the world, and Adam and Eve yield to the temptation, and sin enters into the world. And as a result, all the consequences that are associated with sin and the separation that occurs between man and God as a result of the sin. And we read in chapter 3 about the death that would be associated as a consequence of that sin. So there, we think about that beautiful paradise, but yet a tragedy that is also a part of that beautiful place because of the consequence, the decision, the choice that man has made to sin. Well, it sets in motion God's plan, continues His plan for the necessity to bring about salvation to mankind who is lost in sin. And I want us to turn our attention now to another garden, another very famous garden that we read about in the Bible. We know the Garden of Eden, and we know that that's when sin enters into the world. But there's another garden that's identified in John's Gospel account in the New Testament, where a series of events are set in motion to solve the problem that was created in the Garden of Eden with sin, and the solution being that of the sacrifice of Jesus the Christ. So let's go now to the Garden of Gethsemane in John's Gospel account, and notice here a survey of the series of events that began to take place there that lead to Christ being crucified, and ultimately His body will be placed in another garden, not the Garden of Gethsemane. John does not identify the name of the garden where the body is placed, but it is a garden as it's described in the Gospel account. So let's turn to John chapter 18 and look at some of the events that are occurring that we're quite familiar with, that's going to bring a reconciliation between man and God because of the events that take place in the life of Jesus the Christ. As you think about the events that are occurring here in John chapter 18, we're going to find here at verse number 1, when Jesus had spoken these words, He went out with His disciples over the brook Kidron, where there is a garden, which He and His disciples entered. So you think about the location of this garden. It's the area in Jerusalem. It's going to be east of the city. They're going to leave from the temple area, and they're going to go down through the Kidron Valley, and over to the east of the city is going to be this garden that we identify as the Garden of Gethsemane. And it's the word Gethsemane is going to have to do with an oil press, like an olive press. And certainly the case in the life of Jesus, it's going to be a huge press upon Him as He goes there and is about to suffer in the garden. We learn here as we look at the account as it continues that Judas, who betrayed Him, also knew the place. Because notice, it's not something that Jesus just happens to frequent on this occasion. John tells us that He goes there often. It's a place, it's a garden that He regularly visits because He goes there to meet with His disciples. So this is going to be an area, Judas is going to be familiar with where they're going because Jesus goes there with regularity. And it's here He's betrayed, He's arrested in this garden. You notice verses 2 through 12 of John's Gospel account tells us about this place. He's going to be taken into custody because there's going to be a large number of Roman officers that are going to come out. It's likely that there may be as many as 600 officers who are coming out to arrest him from the city of Jerusalem. The word that's used there to describe the captain of that group is generally a person who is in charge of 600 officers. So this is the person who's coming out, and the arrest of Jesus is going to take place. Notice verses 12 and 13. The detachment of troops came, and the captain of the officers of the Jews arrested Jesus and bound him, and they led him away. So it's here in this garden that Jesus is actually arrested. And it sets in motion a number of things that's going to happen now throughout the night. It's in the evening, the night when Jesus comes here. We read in Matthew's Gospel account about his prayers in the garden, his incredible agony in the garden. John's account tells us here about the arrest of Jesus in that garden. The next thing that begins to happen in the life of Jesus will be a series of trials or interrogations or questionings that will happen with Jesus. Beginning in John 18, verse number 13, where they've led him away to Annas first, for he was the father-in-law of Caiaphas, who was the high priest that year. Annas had also served as high priest. He did that a number of years earlier. 4 of Annas' sons would serve as high priest in the Jewish nation, and now Caiaphas, his son-in-law, is serving as high priest. So they go to Annas first, the one who had been high priest. A number of his family members had served as high priest after at this time and leading up to this time. And Annas is wanting to learn more about Jesus, maybe to expose him, to expose his disciples, and he will then turn him over to his son-in-law, who is serving as the high priest. He's going to turn him over to Caiaphas. And he is the one who is going to charge Jesus with blasphemy and identify him as a blasphemer, and will in turn have him sent away to Pilate, who is the chief Roman officer in the city of Jerusalem at this time. Of course, King Herod is there. And he will also question Jesus. Jesus will appear before Pilate on 2 occasions. He will appear to him first, then be sent to Herod, and then return back to Pilate for these questionings. And Pilate finds no fault in Jesus. Look at the account in verse 33 of John chapter 18. Pilate entered the praetorium again, called Jesus and said, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus answered him, "Are you speaking for yourself about this, or did others tell you this concerning me?" Pilate answered, "Am I a Jew? Your own nation and the chief priests have delivered you to me. What have you done?" Jesus answered, "My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would fight so that I should not be delivered to the Jews. But now my kingdom is not from here." Pilate therefore said to him, "Are you a king then?" Jesus answered, "You say rightly that I am a king. For this cause I was born, and for this cause I have come into the world, that I should bear witness to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth hears my voice. Pilate said to him, What is truth? And when he'd said this, he went out again to the Jews and said to them, watch this now. He said to them, I find no fault in him at all. So this is the conclusion that Pilate is coming to during this series of interrogations. That there is no fault in Jesus. So we find Jesus arrested in the garden. We see him questioned by Jews and Gentiles alike. And then John points out a series of rejections of Jesus that begin in verse 39 of John 18 and will continue down through chapter 19 about verse number 16. And it all starts when the Jews are asked, who is to be released? John tells us here about a time frame where a prisoner would be released. And you remember there is a murderous person in prison, a very wicked person who's been engaged in robbery and murder and even rebellion. And his name was Barabbas. And the question comes up about who is to be released. And the Jews determine that they want Barabbas released. They want Jesus to remain in custody, even though Pilate has said that he can find no offense that Jesus has committed. And Jesus is then scourged. He's beaten. His body is going to be mangled because of the beatings that will take place. It will be very bloody by the scourging that would occur as they beat him. And then Pilate says, of course, you remember him making the statement, "Behold the man." And what is it that the Jews demand? You remember the Jews demand that he be crucified. So they totally reject Jesus. They're resistant to him. And that's the next thing here that John tells us. So the events that have started with the arrest have now led to Jesus being handed over for crucifixion. You notice John 19 at verse number 16, he delivered him to be crucified. So they took Jesus and they led him away. And then John tells us next, beginning in verse 17 and continuing down through verse number 30 of the account, he tells us about the crucifixion itself. It's interesting when you look at the amount of space, amount of writing that John gives to the actual crucifixion compared to the other gospel writers, and it's actually not that much. But he does tell us things that the other gospel writers do not tell us. You notice in the account, we remember there are 7 sayings of Jesus. John tells us 3 of those 7 things that the other gospel writers do not tell us in their writing. So even though it's brief, it's very informational about the crucifixion. He tells us also about the discussion that's going on about the nameplate that's to be put on the cross. When someone is crucified, there's a placard that's placed upon the cross to explain what that person is guilty of. And you'll remember the placard that's put on the cross of Jesus identifies him as the King of the Jews. And it's in 3 different languages as it's placed there. So we learn here in John's account about these things that are occurring with the crucifixion of Jesus. And it's also in John's account that we learn about Jesus' blood being shed on the cross of Calvary. When you look at verse number 31, we find here that the body is going to be the body of Jesus is pierced in verse number 34 with a spear in his side, and immediately the blood and water came out. So we learn about Jesus shedding his blood upon Calvary's cross. And there the atonement is made for sin. So what had started in the Garden of Eden leads to what happened in the Garden of Gethsemane and the series of events that lead to the reconciliation that can come from the blood of Christ being shed on our behalf on Calvary's cross. But we said that's not the only garden that's mentioned here. We've noticed the Garden of Eden, we've noticed the Garden of Gethsemane, but there's another garden. And this garden is identified in beginning in verse number 38, where there's two disciples of Jesus who were a part of that Jewish Sanhedrin, that Jewish leadership. You'll remember Joseph of Arimathea being a disciple of Jesus, but secretly for fear of the Jews. Asked Pilate that he might take away the body of Jesus, and Pilate gave him permission. So he came and he took the body of Jesus. And also, secondly, verse 39, there's Nicodemus, who at first came to Jesus by night, also came bringing a mixture of myrrh and aloes, about 100 pounds. And you see in verse number 41, in that place where he was crucified, there was a garden. So again, the tragedy associated with this garden. Jesus is crucified here. He's buried here. It has a new tomb in the garden, which no one had yet been laid. So there they laid Jesus because of the Jews' preparation day, for the tomb was nearby. So here in this garden, where Jesus is crucified, he is buried in the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea. But the tragedy becomes a victory. As we read in chapter 20, Jesus has died, he's been buried, and now in John chapter 20, John tells us about something marvelous that happens in the garden. And Jesus is resurrected from the dead. He tells us about Mary Magdalene coming there very early on the first day of the week, on that Sunday morning, and finding the tomb of Jesus open. And you remember, she's the first one who sees Jesus. And it's interesting, because who did Mary Magdalene think that Jesus was? She supposed him to be the gardener. And the incredible thing, in a way that's true, he is the gardener. He is the one who created that paradise at the very beginning, and placed man there to be in harmony with God, in union with God. And now the gardener, Jesus the Christ, has restored, because of his actions and because of his resurrection from the dead, he restores that opportunity for man to be with him for all eternity in paradise, in heaven above. So when we think about these gardens that are identified in the Bible, the tragedy that fills them, yet we learn, because of the actions of the gardener, because of the actions of Jesus the Christ, there is opportunity for man once again to be reconciled to God, to have that union with God, and to live forever with Him. This morning, as we complete this study, there's opportunity for you to respond in obedience to the gospel invitation, so that you can be reconciled to God and be made right with Him. That opportunity is yours as together we stand and sing.